Free Birds Free on Lake Huron, Part 3. Chapter 6, The Indian Ruins. We were sailing along at that point without a care in the world when those old Manitos decided they were going to make a problem for us again. I'm sure it was the tail of that big old mountain lion that lived under the water that caused our rudder to break. Dad insisted it had to be a rock, but there weren't no rocks sticking up in the water, so what was I to think? It had to be that abominable critter, the mountain lion. Bernie sided with me on this one. Sort of funny how he swung around to my way of thinking after that bear walker incident. The boat was really tough to steer. We had just gone past the village of Black River and could not turn around and put in there. Dad and Bernie managed to steer the boat over towards a stony beach, and we anchored there. Some good luck was on our side because we had seen smoke coming from the woods, which meant there might be someone who could help us. We got out of the water on a point of land which had a trail headed west, so we began following it, thinking it would lead us to where that smoke was coming from, and it did. The path wound through the pine and cedar woods and then into a grassy clearing. On the west side of the clearing was a crudely built house with a great big thorn apple tree right next to it. Smoke was coming out of the chimney, and there was the smell of fresh-baked blueberry pie in the air, and that was making me powerful hungry. We got up almost to the door, and a great big tall black man walked out. He smiled warmly at us and asked, "You folk ain't from around here, are you? Are you in some trouble?" And Dad shook hands with him. I couldn't help but stare at him, 'cause this was the first honest-to-goodness black man I had ever been around. He looked different from us, but not in a bad way. In fact, he looked rather pleasant. "Yes, we are. My boys here and I are on a sailboat cruise from Saginaw Bay up to Sault Ste. Marie, but our rudder broke, snapped right off." Dad held up the broken pin for him to see. "Now that would give you a bad turn of luck, wouldn't it?" "Well, it's being luck. I's got a blacksmithing shop back here, and I can make you a new one sure as heck." "That's great," Dad said, and then introduced himself and us boys. We shook hands with him, and I looked at mine to see if any of the color had come off, but it didn't. His skin didn't feel any different from mine. I found myself liking the black man right off, and realized that no matter what I heard, save for the color, he weren't no different than we were. But they sure had been treated different, as Bernie and I were to find out. "My name's Marshall. Round here they call me Nigger Marshall. You all can call me whatever you want. Why don't you boys go in? Mrs. Marshall is in there. She'll give you a piece of pie. Your daddy and me'll go down to the shop and see what I can do with this here pin." Bernie and I went into the house, and there was a plump black lady busy at the wood cook stove. "Well, Lottie, it's good to have some kids around. I heard your daddy talking out there. Now, you all just sit right down at the table, and I'll get you some of that blueberry pie. Do that sound good?" "Sure does," me and Bernie both said almost at the same time, and oh boy was that pie good, and I felt bad that Dad wasn't getting any. He'd sure have liked it too. "So, you's on a lake cruise. Must be pretty exciting," she said. "Well, it has been so far," I replied. Then I asked her, "How come you live out here in the woods? Don't you and your husband get sort of lonely out here?" I was sorry I asked, because she got a real sad look on her face. "Well, honey, it's quiet out here, and we kind of like it that way. We came from down south just before the Civil War. We was slaves on a plantation down there in Dixie. We just sort of keep to ourselves now." I had never met anyone before that had been an actual slave, and I could see why she must have been kind of sad. But still, it seemed like there was something more, and I asked, "But don't you have any children?" At this, tears came to her eyes, and Bernie gave me a cold look. "Don't you know when to keep your mouth shut, Joey?" "Oh, it's all right," she said, wiping the tears from her eyes. "I had 2 babies, a strapping strong boy like his daddy, and a little girl that was prettier than any summer day ever could be." "Well, where are they?" I asked. "Honey," she said, "the life of a slave is a sorrowful one, with lots of sadness in it. My baby boy, they took him from me when he was only 5. They traded him to another plantation, and my girl, well, she was only 3 and she went to another plantation, and I ain't never seen 'em since. We tried hard as we could to find them before we left, but it just weren't no luck. They's out there someplace, and I hope someday, in their hearts, they remember us." Bernie and me both had tears in our eyes. I got up and put my arms around the big lady and hugged her tight. I told her, "I'm sure they remember you, and I'm sure they would be proud of you both." Finally, Bernie got up and put his arms around her too. Mrs. Marshall hugged us both and then gave us each a kiss on the forehead. Dad and Mr. Marshall came in, and I said, "Boy, that sure didn't take long. You got the new pin already, Dad?" "Not yet," Dad said. "Looks like we might have to be here overnight, too." Mr. Marshall explained, "There's a hole in the bellows, so I can't get the fire hot enough in the forge to make a new pin. I'm going to have to ride into Black River and get some fabric to fix it. Like to be dark before I gets back." "Well, I'll give you a list of a few things I need from town," Mrs. Marshall said, as she scurried about looking for paper and pencil. Mr. Marshall said, "You and the boys are welcome to ride with me if you'd like." "How about it, guys? You want to go?" Dad asked. Me and Bernie decided to stay and maybe do a little exploring, and Dad went on with Mr. Marshall. Mrs. Marshall warned, "Now you boys be careful out in them woods. Don't go getting lost, you hear? Don't need any more misplaced babies, we sure don't. And if you stay on the path out back, you boys will come to a big rock on the west side. Cut through there and you'll find some Indian ruins. Boys just can't get enough of Indians." Well, I knew of two boys who had had more than their fill of Indians right then, and she wouldn't have to look far. But Bernie and I took off down the trail, toting a sack with a couple sandwiches that Mrs. Marshall had made for us. "I don't know about those Indian ruins, Joey. I've sort of had enough of the Indians for a while, haven't you?" he asked in a sort of hopeful voice. "I don't know. I really want to go see those ruins, Bernie. Maybe we'll learn more about what's going on with all this spirit stuff." "I was afraid you'd say that, little brother, or should I say little fox." The woods was real warm and humid, and the katydids were buzzing, and every once in a while we could hear the tree toads singing their songs. There couldn't be a better place in the whole world for a boy to be during the summertime than in the woods or on the lake. It felt again like the sort of day when there would be a late afternoon thunderstorm. I hoped Dad would be back before any storm broke, and it wasn't long before we came to the big old rock we figured must have been the one Mrs. Marshall told us about. There was a little stream there, and Bernie and I went down and got a drink of that clear, cool water, and I wiped my chin, and then we started back into the woods to look for the stone ruins. We were busy swatting all those darn mosquitoes that was attacking us. They acted like they would have liked to drunk our bodies clean dry, but we pushed on. Soon we came upon what looked like the old building foundations, but not like that I'd ever seen any built. These were stones piled on top of one another without any mortar or anything. They looked very old, all right, but I never did hear tell of the Indians ever building like that, with stones, I mean. In the middle of one of the larger foundations, there was a big black circle in the dirt that looked as though at one time, a long time ago, it might have been where there was a campfire. I thought it might be a good idea to dig in there and see what we could find, so we both got down on our hands and knees and got to digging. The digging weren't hard because the dirt was soft and kind of waxy. As we dug down, we found a nice pink arrowhead that we were both pretty excited about. It was long enough to be a spear point, really. There were bits of bone and all sorts of fragments of pottery mixed in with the dirt. Bernie thought that might have been the remains of what the people were cooking. We continued digging on down, and we uncovered a clay Indian pot. It was a strange one, though, 'cause all the things under God's creation it could have been made to look like. That darned old pot, all cracked and worn, well, it was shaped just like a human skull. Bernie held it up in his hand and then said, "Okay, little fox, why don't we just put this here old pot back in the ground and, get out of here, nice and easy?" "No, let me see it." I looked the pot over good, and it sort of had a strange feel to me. It made my fingers kind of tingle. It was all stained black inside, like at one time something had been cooked in it. But what would you cook in a pot that looked like a human skull? Surely not dinner. And then I said, "Bernie, I don't know why, but an idea just came to me." He rolled his eyes back and said, "Little brother, your ideas are usually trouble. Let's just put the pot back and get on back to Marshall's cabin and wait for Dad." "No! Now come on, Bernie. I helped you last night when you had to go to that stupid outhouse, when all the time there was a chamber pot right under the bed. Boy, that was stupid." "Now wait just a second. Who you calling stupid, Joey?" "Oh, just settle down. Just help me out here. I'll take the pot back to the stream and get some water in it. You build a fire right here with your magnifying glass, and I'll be right back." Before Bernie could argue with me any more, I was off with the pot, leaving him sitting there to get the fire going. I really don't know why I wanted to do this, but something inside just sort of told me that I had to do it. Once I filled the pot, I rushed back to find Bernie had already got a nice little fire going. I thought about those people that must have gathered around a campfire right here maybe 1,000 years before us. Then there was Bernie and me, rekindling a fire right where theirs had been. Sort of made me feel kind of uneasy inside. But I set the pot in the middle of the flames, and let it begin to heat up. As the water began to make steam, I held tight with one hand to that stone pendant I wore around my neck. Something strange was happening as that pot heated up. There was a strong smell coming from it, and it made me feel a little bit lightheaded. "What is that smell?" Bernie asked, but I couldn't answer him. I kind of felt like I was falling backwards, and all the trees and everything around me was growing sort of foggy. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I was scared. I closed my eyes and felt as if I was asleep, and I began to hear voices speaking in Indian, and I could hear singing too. And when I opened my eyes, everything was clear again. But I wasn't with Bernie. I was still by the ruins, but they weren't ruins no more. They were crudely made buildings, and there was all sorts of Indian people around me. I felt sort of strange, and I looked down, and all I was wearing was a loincloth. I felt embarrassed at first till I noticed that all the men and boys were dressed that same way. Still, I didn't feel like the feel of having my rear side all bare like that. I was still clutching the pendant, which hung around my neck. The campfire was burning brightly, and I walked over to it. The pretty lady who had given me the pendant was there kneeling beside the fire. She looked up, and she smiled at me. "Little Fox, I'm glad you came. Look about you, Little Fox, because it is here that many spirits dwell. They want you to come to them, to be part of them, so you can understand." "Understand what?" I asked her. "You must go on a quest, Little Fox, a sacred journey, and you will find your own Manitou. It will guide you and protect you the rest of your life. Go north from the village, and you will find a pit that I have dug for you, and I have lined it with furs. Go into that pit and wait. Wait as long as it takes. You must stay there until the spirits come to you with their special message for your life." In an instant, I was standing beside the pit that she had told me about. The only sounds I could hear was the wind and the birds, and the waves breaking on the shore not far away. I was alone, and the sun hung low in the sky. I got down there in the pit and sat there, hoping the spirits would not make me wait too long. As I sat there in the dark, my legs began to cramp up and get real sore, but having been told to stay in the pit, well, that's what I did. I wondered if I had gone back through time, or maybe it was all a dream. I thought about Dad and Bernie, and I wished I was with them. Everything seemed so far away, everything I cared for. I passed the night that way and slept very little. Soon the gray light of morning greeted my weary eyes, but still the spirits had not come to me. I was so sore all over from sitting there, but I stayed there just as I was told to do. My belly hurt now because I was hungry, and my throat was also very dry. I don't think I'd ever been so thirsty as I was right then, and I'd have given most anything for just a drop of water on my tongue. That day seemed like it would never end as I sat there wondering what time it was, and how long before it would be dark again. I dreaded another such night. Once a little chipmunk came to the side of the pit and stuck his head over to see what was in there. It seemed so good to see something else alive, because I really felt like I was all alone in the world, and that was a feeling that sort of scared me just a little bit. He scampered away, and I was alone again. I was sort of relieved when it began to get dark again, and I closed my eyes, feeling weak all over. I woke up when night filled the sky again, and above the pit were all kinds of little sparks dancing through the air, but they weren't really sparks because I could hear voices coming from them, and laughter. And then, tarnation, one came down into the pit and landed right on my head. I cringed, expecting it to burn, but it didn't. Just sort of made me tingle, and I heard a voice from it say, "Little Fox, come up out of the earth. Your Manitou waits for you." I crawled up unsteadily from the pit. My legs were numb from setting, and I felt really dizzy from not having eaten. There before me stood a fox, as pretty an animal as you ever might want to see. Its eyes, though, was kind of strange. They seemed like they glowed with fire from inside the animal, and that scared me because of what happened to that shaman at the reservation. Well, as I live and breathe, that fox spoke to me, and I could hardly believe that. "I am your spirit, Little Fox. You are in me, and I am in you, and I will guide you through the rest of your life. I will let no harm come to you, and my children will be your children, and your people will be my people." Then that darned talking fox jumped on me, and I fell over backwards. He sat his front paws on that stone pendant around my neck, and smoke rose from it. And when he moved his foot, there was a print left there. Then he said to me, "Whenever you need me, hold the pendant and call out to me with your mind and heart, not your mouth, and I will come to you, and I will help you, and you will never be alone." I stood back up and looked for the fox, but it was gone, and so were those little spirits that looked like sparks. I sat down on the ground. The wet grass against my bare butt felt really weird, and tears came to my eyes. I don't know why, but I just couldn't stop crying. Then Bernie was pushing on my shoulder and saying, "Joey, what on earth is wrong with you? Stand up and quit your crying." I looked up, and I was back, right where I had been before the vision. But was it a vision? I felt the pendant. As sure as all get out, there was an imprint of the fox's paw right there on the stone. "Bernie," I said, "you ain't going to believe what happened to me." And then I commenced to telling him about all of it, and showed him the paw print on the stone. "Joey, this stuff is getting all too strange. Let's get back to the cabin. We got to tell Dad about this." Well, we started back towards the cabin, and then we saw this burrow in the ground. There were 4 fox pups playing in front of it with an old seagull feather. They looked like nice little fellows, and when they saw us, they just stood there yapping away. They should have scurried back down the burrow, but they didn't, so I walked towards them, but Bernie just stayed his ground where he was. "Joey, get back here. Their mama comes around, and you'll be in big trouble for sure. She'll light into your hide and fill you full of holes." And I sat down there by the 4 pups, and they was all over me like I was their brother or something, crawling on me, nipping at me, and wrestling. And pretty soon the mama came up out of her den, and she just sat there and watched us. But she looked over at Bernie and growled. I heard him mutter, "Now if that just don't beat all." Pretty soon those pups got tired, and they crawled back down into the hole into the den. The mama fox came over to me and licked my face all over, and then turned and went back down into the den with her little ones. I got up and brushed the dirt off my clothes and walked back over to Bernie. I was a-smiling because that had been lots of fun. I looked at Bernie and said, "Now how do I explain that except for the fact that my dream weren't no dream at all? I bet you 10 to 1 that I really went back through time and I was with them people." Bernie scratched his head and said, "Joey, at this point I'd believe just about anything. Come on, let's get back. It's getting sort of late." So we headed back to the cabin. By the time we got there, the sun was just about to go down, and Dad and Mr. Marshall wasn't back yet. As I thought earlier, there was another storm gathering to the west. I reckoned from the sound of the thunder it would be a while before it got to us. Mrs. Marshall had a good steaming pot of potato soup waiting for us when we got back, and that was sure enough good, with bits of bacon in it and all kinds of vegetables that she had grown herself. And by the time we finished, Bernie and me had to go out and use the outhouse. When we returned, she sent us up to the loft to sleep. The loft was neat because you could look down over the rest of the cabin. I laid there, watching her in her rocking chair below, reading her Bible, and I was wishing there was something I could do to help her. She was such a kind person, but there weren't nothing any of us could do. I fell asleep real fast and never even heard Dad come in. Chapter 7. The Shaman Lady of Thunder Bay. In the morning, we had breakfast of oatmeal that I had to choke down. Oatmeal gags me. I never could stand it. Bernie, Dad, and I went for a walk after that. I showed him the pendant and told him all about what had happened, even about the little fox pups that was playing with me. We took him on back where the ruins were because he wanted to see them, and he wanted to see that old skull pot. But now that was another curious thing, because when we got there, that pot was gone, and it looked like me and Bernie had never dug down into that old fire pit at all. "I guess you probably don't believe us now, do you, Dad?" I asked. He roughed up my hair a bit and said, "Joey, there's been so much happened for me not to believe you." Then he said, "This has sure turned out to be an adventure, more so than I ever thought it would be." Bernie shook his head and said, "Mama and Tesha won't believe half of what we tell them when we get back home." "I'm sure of that," Dad said. "There's one thing I'm kind of sad about, though." And then I told him all about what Mrs. Marshall had told Bernie and me about her kids and how they'd been taken away. Then I asked, "Ain't there nothing we can do to help them, Dad?" He thought on that for a minute or two, and then he said, "Well, Mr. Marshall told me all about that, too. I've been giving it some thought. I sure would like to be able to help them and their son and daughter." Then Bernie suggested maybe Uncle Anthony could help, with him being a big lawyer and all. "Well, maybe he can," Dad replied. "When we get home, I promise I will write to him and see if there's anything he can do." On our way back to the cabin, we saw a family of skunks, a mama with 5 little ones running along behind her. They looked so gentle enough, but we gave them their space. Seeing Bernie and me'd been sprayed by one once, and that was something I'll never forget. Mama filled an old wooden tub outside with tomato juice, and she made us get naked and stuck us down into that stuff. She scrubbed us until I thought she was going to rub off our hide. Then while we sat there, she burned our clothes, an abomination as she didn't make us sleep for a week out in the barn behind the house. No, I never did cotton much to skunks after all that happened. At the cabin, Mr. Marshall gave us the new pin he had made and refused to take any money for it, but Dad left him some on the kitchen table anyways, and after that we three headed back to the boat. Dad made the repair, and by noon we were on our way again towards Alpena. It wasn't a long trip, only an hour or so. We passed quite a few small islands, and I kind of wished we could put in on one of them, but we just sailed on by. Now, Alpena was the biggest place we'd seen since we left Harborport. It was a good-sized city. We put in at the Besner docks and then headed into town to order more supplies to be delivered to the boat at the dock. The streets in Alpena were made of wooden planks. Guess the dirt must have been kind of marshy under them. The store we went into was the biggest I'd ever been in, and it had just about everything a person could want. I was surprised when Dad said that he knew the man who owned the place. He told that they had grown up in the same neighborhood and had kept in touch by letters every so often. Then him and Dad met up with each other a few years back at a convention of mercantile owners down in Chicago. Dad walked up to the counter and shook hands with his old buddy, and warm greetings were exchanged. Then he introduced Mr. Cain to us boys. Him and Dad got to talking, and Mr. Cain set Bernie and me over the other counter to each pick out a penny bag of candy. That was pretty nice of him. Oh man, was that candy good. After we got our candy, we went back over to the counter by Dad. Dad said to me, "Mr. Cain would like to see your pendant, Joey. Could you show it to him?" I didn't take it off, but I held it up for him to look at. "Wow," he exclaimed. "I'll tell you what, Joey. If you want to sell that, I'll give you $20 for it." Mine and Bernie's mouths dropped open. $20 was more than I'd ever seen at one time in my life. But I couldn't give up the pendant for no amount. And when I said no, Bernie's mouth dropped open again, and him and Dad both gave me a surprised look. "Are you sure, Joey?" Dad asked. "That's an awful lot of money, son." "Dad, this is a very special gift from that Indian lady. I could never sell it, not for any amount of money." Mr. Cain said, "Well, son, I understand how you feel, but if you ever change your mind, I'll have the money right here for you." "Thanks, Mr. Cain," I said. "It's a tough offer to turn down." Bernie shot me a look. Yeah, only an idiot would turn down $20 for an old stone necklace. Why boys don't even wear necklaces. "Bernie, it's special to me," I said, "and maybe the way you think is why you haven't given you a special gift either." Mr. Cain came to my defense. "And Indian men and boys do wear pendants. This is a symbol of the fox paw, and it's very powerful, Bernie. They don't just give it to anyone. Now look, there's a lady I want you all to meet. She's an Indian lady who is what they call the Grand Medicine Society. And she is in what is called the Grand Medicine Society. Joey, she'll want to see that pendant, and she's definitely going to want to hear your story." But then Dad said, "Jefferson," that was Mr. Cain's first name, I'd like to have the meter, but we have a lot of water to cover, and we need to get on our way shortly." But Mr. Cain insisted. "Hudson, he has to meet her. I believe there's something this boy needs to learn from her." Dad gave it some thought, and then said, "Nope, Jefferson, we need to be on our way, really. If there's time on our way back, we'll stop and meet her." I felt kind of let down, but then Mr. Cain came up with an incredible idea. "I'll tell you what, Hudson, well, where are you going to put in for the night?" "Well, Sheboygan," Dad answered. "Never make it by nightfall. You best put in just a little north of here at Rogers City, and then make for Sheboygan tomorrow. You leave Joey with me, and I'll take him to meet the lady this evening after I close the store. Then in the morning, I'll put him on the northbound train, and you can meet him at the Sheboygan depot." "I don't know, Jefferson. I trust you and all, but I don't know if I want him away from me for overnight." Then I got to begging. "Oh, come on, Dad. It'll be exciting. I ain't never been on a train ride. And maybe I'm supposed to meet this Indian lady. I mean, look at all the stuff that's happened to me." Bernie then butted in, and I could tell what he was saying was 'cause he wasn't invited to stay too. "Let him stay, Dad. It's just overnight. It'll be good to be rid of him for a spell. Maybe all this weird stuff will stop if he ain't with us." Dad argued, "Oh, Bernie, it isn't Joey's fault, but for some reason he is a big part of it. But, well, I guess it can't hurt any. Joey, you can stay overnight with Mr. Cain, but you better be on that train in the morning, and you mind everything he tells you to do." "I will, Dad, but can I ask one favor, Mr. Cain?" "Well, sure, I guess so," he answered. "Can Bernie stay too?" Jefferson smiled and said, "Sure, why not? That all right with you, Hudson?" Well, I guess so. I'll be alone for the night. Give me a chance to get good and rested up. I'll get back to the boat and head out as soon as you have the supplies delivered. I'll see you boys in the morning, and you better be on that train." With that, Dad hugged us both and then headed for the door. Now, now that was a low feeling. I wished Dad had decided to stay with us too. I knew it was just going to be for overnight, but I was going to miss him and worry about him. It was right then I realized that my dad was one of the most important people in the world to me. Before he walked out the door, I called out to him, "Dad!" He stopped and turned around, and I ran to him and gave him another hug. "What was that for?" he asked. "Because I'm going to miss you, and because I love you, Dad." That brought a big smile to his face, and he looked down at me and said, "Well, I love you too, son, and I'll see you in the morning." Dad walked out of the store, whistling and seeming very happy. You know, in all my years, I don't ever recall telling Dad that I loved him. It was just that sort of thing that I thought that he always knew. But right then, I felt it was something that I should say to him more often, just so that he would never forget what a special person he always will be to me and to Bernie, Tesha, and Mama too. Well, that day in the store, we helped Mr. Cain out with his cleaning and just the kinds of stuff we did around Dad's store. I was real anxious for the store to close so we could go meet that Indian lady. Mr. Cain said she lived out by Thunder Bay, not only but a couple miles off from us. Around a little after 5, the last customer left the store, and Mr. Cain took us out back to his wagon. It sure sounded loud riding over those planks they used for roads. We left the city and headed down a country road and then into the woods. I felt most comfortable in the woods and figured when I grew up that's where I would like to live. On this trip I was finding that there was so much woods and so much to discover. Mr. Cain pulled up in front of a ramshackle old house that looked like it would fall over if a good wind came up. Outside were all sorts of cooking pots and stuff just sort of scattered about. It was messy, to be sure, and there was a funny smell there that wafted through the air once in a while. It was sort of like the smell of dead animals, but I tried to ignore that even though Bernie was turning up his nose. We all got out of the wagon, and Mr. Cain walked up and knocked on the door. There came a dry, crackling voice from inside. "Who is it? What do you want?" "It's Jefferson Cain, Sadie. I brought someone you need to meet." The door didn't open yet, but she asked, "Is it a little boy? A little white boy?" I was kind of surprised by this, and he answered her, "Why, yes, Sadie, it is." The door swung open wide, and she said, "I've been expecting you." And she walked on into the sunlight, and if I thought Chief Tamaqua was old, well, this lady could have been his grandmother. I walked over to her and said, "How could you be expecting us? You didn't know we was coming." "Oh, yes, I did, little fox, because it came to me in a dream last night. The spirits, they told me all about you, and for some reason you have found favor in their eyes. They like you. Maybe because you took the time to learn about them from the books, but they want me to give you something. You stay here, and I'll be right back." Sadie went back into the house and shut the door. The three of us just stood there looking at each other. I sure wish Dad could have been with us for this. Well, a few minutes later she walked out of the house carrying what looked like a dead animal, but it was all covered with pretty beads. She said, "I was told you should have this, and I made it myself. It is an otter skin medicine bag, and it is powerful medicine for you. You must place in it the things you have gathered on your journey. They will be your medicine. I have placed something in it for you." "What?" I asked, hardly believing what I was seeing. "Inside is a pouch of kinnikinick that I made. It is a very special tobacco made of things from the woods and fields. There is also a clay pipe that I dug up along the river not far from here. It is a pipe that belonged to my people, our people, many years ago. When you smoke it, think on the good things Gitchimanito God has given you in your life." Sadie handed me the bag and I thanked her. "But I have nothing to give you back, Sadie. That doesn't seem right." "I am now your grandmother," she told me, "and you are my grandson. You do not need to give me anything. Now you have a long journey to be on. Go, be on your way." Then she just turned and went back into the house. This was an unusual old lady indeed, but Mr. Cain, Bernie, and me got back into the wagon and pulled away from her house. Mr. Cain said, "Now that's quite an honor, little fox. I ain't never known them to give something like that to any white person before." And I sat there holding that medicine bag and said, "Yeah, but what would Dad and Mama think about me smoking? I sure don't think either of them would like that very much. Mr. Cain smiled and then told us, "I got a cabin a couple miles from here. How about we spend the night there? There's a small pond out back of it, and you boys can do some fishing if you want." Bernie finally spoke up as he had been awfully quiet again. "All right, I'd like that. Maybe we can take a swim. We ain't had one in a few days." "Sounds good to me," I added, and then we was on our way to Mr. Cain's cabin. When we finally arrived at the log cabin, he said, "This is it. Pond's out back, and you'll find fishing poles back there too. Have yourselves a time, and I'll go in and get a fire going so I can cook up some supper." Bernie and I went around back. It had been such a hot day that we forgot all about the fishing poles. We took off all our clothes, ran onto the little dock, and jumped into the water. The water was real warm, being that the pond was so shallow, but boy, it felt good. I walked around on my hands under the water, and we splashed each other, and Bernie even dunked me once when I wasn't looking. We must have swam out there for a good hour, and then Mr. Cain came out on the dock and said, "If you boys are hungry, I got food ready. Come on in. There's towels you can dry off on and not get your clothes all wet." So we got out of the water, picked up our clothes, and followed Mr. Cain in. After we was dressed, we sat down to a dinner of beans, potatoes, ham, and it was pretty darn good, too. "You know," Mr. Cain began, "seeing you boys out there like that reminded me of you and your dad when we was boys. We used to go skinny dipping all the time. There ain't no time in your entire life as good as when you're a boy." "What else did you do together?" Bernie asked. "Everything. We went fishing and hunting, and we even did some animal trapping together. For a while, him and me made pretty good money off trapping. Now there's something you two boys could do. Did you ever try it?" Bernie answered, "Well, once, but Joey didn't like trapping. But it's something maybe I'll get back into when this trip is over. You boys have a big day tomorrow. Got to be up early for the train. Best be getting to bed. You two can take the bedroom at the top of the stairs. There are bunk beds in there." But I protested, "Mr. Cain, can't Bernie and me go back out in the water just a little while longer? I mean, it's so nice outside." "Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt none. Yeah, go ahead, but I'm going to bed. Now don't be out there too late." We got up from the table and rushed out the door. I grabbed the smoking pipe and the kinnikinnick from the medicine pouch. Well, we got back in the water and swam for a while, and Bernie said, "I'm going to go over on that raft over there and just sit and listen to the night sounds." This is the first night nothing really strange had happened to us. Then he said, "For luck, I'll knock on wood." And then he tapped on my head. Very funny. I went back on the shore and got the pipe and tobacco, and then waded out into the waist-deep water onto the raft. "Say, brother, you want to have a smoke with me?" "Sure, I'll give it a try." The pond looked so different with the bright moon reflecting off from it. I put the old pipe in my mouth and stuffed it full of tobacco, and then I lit it. It had a real sweet smell, and it tasted kind of good. The first few times I inhaled, I choked on the smoke, and Bernie laughed at me. He put out his hand to me and said, "Here, let me give that a try. I'll show you how to smoke." Well, old Bernie took a big long draw off it, inhaled it, and then started choking so bad that he dropped the pipe on the raft and clean fell over backwards into the water. I sat there laughing fit to burst. He stuck his head back up out of the water and was still sputtering and coughing as he said, "What the heck's so funny, you idiot?" I got control and said, "You are, Bernie. You flipped over, and all I could see was your butt white as a water lily. And oh, by the way, big brother, thanks for showing me the right way to smoke. I didn't realize I was supposed to choke on it quite like that." Bernie pulled himself back up on the raft and gave me a shove that nearly knocked me over the side. "Don't be such a brat, Joey, just because the spirits like you," he said in a silly voice. "I can still knock the snot right out of you if I want to." "Oh, yeah? Like the other night when I doubled you over at the lighthouse? You caught me off guard, and you know it. Now shut up before I push your ugly face off into the pond." Well, Bernie was getting a little riled up, so I left him alone, and after another half hour or so of listening to the frogs and crickets, we went back to the shore and gathered up our clothes and got to bed. We were both looking forward to the train ride in the morning. To be continued with Chapter 8, Another Mystery.